Diane Lane was one of Hollywood's most admired stars. But her personal life? That's where things get complicated. Behind the elegance, the acclaimed roles, and decades in the spotlight, there have always been whispers, affairs with co-stars, secret relationships that never made it to the public, moments on set that people claimed went far beyond acting. Some of those stories sounded unbelievable. Others refused to go away. And through all of it, she never said a word. But now, at 61, that silence is starting to crack. Diane Lane is finally addressing the rumors, the relationships, and the moments she kept hidden for years. And what she's revealing is raising even more questions than answers. So what actually happened behind the scenes? And which of those scandals were never just rumors at all? Stay with us to find out. A childhood marked by chaos, independence, and early stardom. Diane Lane's story didn't begin with Hollywood. It began with instability. She was born on a cold January day in 1965 in New York City, into a world that was already unpredictable. Her mother, Colleen Price, was a nightclub singer and former Playboy centerfold living a fast-paced, glamorous life. Her father, Burton Eugene Lane, worked as a drama coach and drove a cab to make ends meet. Their relationship, however, didn't last. Just 2 weeks after Diane was born, her parents separated. Looking for a fresh start, her mother took baby Diane to Mexico and filed for divorce. For the next 6 years, Diane grew up surrounded by her mother's vibrant but unstable lifestyle, until everything shifted again. Her father eventually gained custody, and Diane returned to New York to live with him. Life with her father was far from easy. They moved constantly, staying in cheap hotels and getting by however they could. As a young girl, Diane often rode along in his taxi, quietly observing the raw, unpredictable energy of the city around her. By the time she was 15, that unstable upbringing had already shaped her independence. Maybe too much. Wanting freedom, she made a bold and impulsive decision. She flew to Los Angeles with her friend, actor Christopher Atkins, chasing a brief escape. Looking back, Diane later admitted it was the kind of decision that comes from having too much freedom too early. When she returned, she didn't go back home. Instead, she moved in with a friend's family, rented a room, and supported herself while finishing school through correspondence courses. But her life was about to take another dramatic turn. Determined to take control again, her mother kidnapped her and took her to Georgia. What followed was a legal battle between her parents that lasted weeks. In the end, Diane was reunited with her father. But the experience left lasting emotional scars. For 3 years, she had no contact with her mother. Eventually, time softened the distance between them. Slowly, they began rebuilding their relationship, piece by piece. Amid all this chaos, Diane found something that grounded her: acting. Inspired by her grandmother, a Pentecostal preacher known for commanding attention, Diane was drawn to performance from an early age. At just 6 years old, she stepped onto the stage at New York's La Mama Experimental Theater Club, and something clicked. By 12, she was already performing in the Cherry Orchard, sharing the stage with major talents. And while her career was gaining momentum, she remained focused on her education, enrolling in an accelerated program at Hunter College High School. Then came the moment that would define her future. At just 13, Diane faced a life-changing choice: Broadway or film. She chose film, taking a role in A Little Romance alongside Laurence Olivier. It was a risk, but one that paid off. Olivier himself reportedly called her the new Grace Kelly. Diane Lane's defining years. By the early 1980s, it was clear Diane Lane wasn't just another young actress. She was being positioned as something much bigger. When she appeared on the cover of Time magazine, many saw it as confirmation. Hollywood had found its next leading lady, often compared to a modern-day Grace Kelly, and she proved quickly that she could live up to the attention. Diane took on a variety of roles that showed both range and boldness. In Touched by Love, she played a troubled teenager, while films like Cattle Annie and Little Britches allowed her to explore more grounded, character-driven performances. She even stepped into comedy with Six Pack alongside Kenny Rogers. But it was her role in Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, that truly stood out. Playing a rebellious punk band leader, she showed a fearless edge that set her apart from her peers. Her performances in The Outsiders and Rumble Fish, both directed by Francis Ford Coppola, helped cement her place in Hollywood. Surrounded by rising stars like Tom Cruise and Rob Lowe, Diane didn't fade into the background. She stood out. At that point, she wasn't just promising, she was becoming one of the industry's brightest young talents. But success didn't come without setbacks. A series of films, including Streets of Fire and The Cotton Club, failed to meet expectations. The momentum slowed, and Diane made a decision that surprised many. She stepped away. She returned to Georgia, focusing on something far more personal, rebuilding her relationship with her mother. As she later reflected, "We had to repair our relationship because I wanted my mother back." That period became a turning point. When she returned to acting, she did so with a different perspective. Roles in The Big Town and Lady Beware marked the beginning of her comeback, but it was the 1989 miniseries Lonesome Dove that truly reignited her career. Her performance earned her an Emmy nomination and reminded audiences of her depth as an actress. Through the 1990s, Diane continued rebuilding her reputation, taking on diverse roles and earning critical praise. In Chaplin, where she portrayed Paulette Goddard, and later in My New Gun, she showed a growing confidence and maturity in her performances. By the end of the decade, she was no longer making a comeback. She was reclaiming her place. In 1999, her role in A Walk on the Moon marked another high point. Playing a woman torn between love and responsibility, Diane delivered a deeply emotional performance that resonated with audiences. Starring alongside Viggo Mortensen and Liev Schreiber, she earned a nomination for Best Female Lead at the Independent Spirit Awards. Then came the early 2000s, a period that showcased her versatility more than ever. In The Perfect Storm, she brought warmth and emotional depth as the partner of Mark Wahlberg's character, grounding the film in something real. Soon after, in My Dog Skip, she shifted effortlessly into the role of a loving, talkative mother, a completely different tone, yet equally convincing. Career peaks and the rumors that followed. By the early 2000s, Diane Lane had reached a turning point, one that would redefine her career. In 2002, she took on one of the most complex roles of her life in Unfaithful. Playing a suburban wife drawn into a dangerous affair, Diane delivered a performance that was raw, emotional, and impossible to ignore. It earned her an Academy Award nomination and widespread critical praise. Critics called it a revelation, the moment she fully stepped into her power as an actress. The success of Unfaithful changed everything. She followed it with Under the Tuscan Sun, portraying a woman rebuilding her life after heartbreak, a role that earned her another Golden Globe nomination. From there, Diane moved effortlessly between genres, taking on romantic dramas, thrillers, and character-driven films like Must Love Dogs, Hollywoodland, and Nights in Rodanthe, where she reunited with Richard Gere. But even with steady success, she wasn't satisfied. At times, she considered stepping away from acting altogether, searching for something more meaningful. After a brief break, she returned with renewed focus. In Secretariat, she portrayed Penny Chenery, a determined woman who defied expectations, a role that reflected Diane's own resilience. Soon after, she impressed audiences again in HBO's Cinema Verite, continuing to prove her range. Her work wasn't limited to acting. In 2012, she lent her voice to the PBS documentary Half the Sky, using her platform to advocate for women's rights around the world. By then, Diane wasn't just a performer. She had become a voice for something larger. Then came another shift. She stepped into the world of blockbuster cinema, joining the DC universe as Martha Kent in Man of Steel. Her portrayal of Superman's mother brought warmth and depth to the role, making the character feel grounded and real. She later reprised the role in Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, becoming a familiar presence in a completely different kind of Hollywood landscape. Not every project moved forward as planned. A highly anticipated miniseries where she was set to portray Hillary Clinton was canceled before production, but Diane moved on without hesitation. She continued working steadily, appearing in films like Every Secret Thing, Trumbo, and lending her voice to Pixar's Inside Out. Throughout the years, she remained consistent, adapting, evolving, and staying relevant across decades. But alongside her career, there was always another narrative following her: rumors. In the 1980s, during the rise of the Brat Pack era, Diane was linked to Emilio Estevez after they met on St. Elmo's Fire. Their connection quickly turned into a real relationship, one that seemed like a classic Hollywood romance. But like many of those relationships, it didn't last. Still, they parted on good terms, remaining friends long after the romance ended. Then there was Richard Gere. When the two starred together in Unfaithful, their on-screen chemistry was undeniable. Audiences couldn't ignore it, and speculation quickly followed. But their connection went back years earlier, to the Cotton Club in 1984. By the time they reunited, their dynamic was built on trust and familiarity, something that translated powerfully on screen. Diane, however, was clear. Their relationship was always professional. What people saw was chemistry, not reality. Years later, another unexpected moment added to the narrative. While filming Serenity in 2019, Matthew McConaughey revealed he had a childhood crush on Diane. It was a light-hearted confession, but one that added a new layer to their on-screen dynamic. Their performances carried a sense of history and familiarity, something audiences could feel. Still, Diane kept things grounded, emphasizing that their relationship was based on mutual respect and professionalism. On-screen chemistry or something more? Diane Lane's co-star, Rumors explained. Throughout her career, Diane Lane often found herself at the center of speculation, not because she invited it, but because her on-screen chemistry with co-stars felt so real, it blurred the line between performance and reality. One of the earliest examples came in 1989, when she starred alongside Robert Duvall in the acclaimed miniseries Lonesome Dove. Diane played Lorena Wood, a strong and resilient woman, while Duvall took on the role of Augustus Gus McCrae, a seasoned and charismatic former Texas Ranger. Their performances were powerful, and their connection on screen was undeniable. Naturally, rumors followed, but Diane was quick to dismiss them. She consistently maintained that what audiences were seeing wasn't romance. It was mutual respect and dedication to the craft. Both actors were deeply committed to bringing authenticity to the story, and that shared focus translated into a partnership that elevated the entire project. In the end, it wasn't a relationship that defined their work. It was their professionalism. Years earlier, during the early 1980s, Diane had experienced something more personal. While working around the time of The Outsiders, she formed a close bond with actor Christopher Atkins. What started as a friendship gradually turned into a young romance. It was a simpler time in her life, early in her career, before the full weight of fame had settled in. Looking back, Diane has spoken of that relationship with warmth. It didn't last, but it remained a meaningful memory, a reminder of the kind of genuine, uncomplicated connection that often comes at the beginning of a journey. Around that same period, another relationship drew even more attention. On the set of The Outsiders, Diane worked closely with Matt Dillon, who played the rebellious Dallas Winston opposite her character, Cherry Valance. Their on-screen chemistry added depth to the film, but it didn't stop there. Off-screen, the connection continued, evolving into a brief relationship. For Diane, who was still very young at the time, the experience came with challenges. The attention, the rumors, and the sudden exposure were overwhelming. Still, she has reflected on that time honestly, noting that despite the pressure, they parted on good terms. Diane Lane's lesser-known relationships and quiet connections. Not every story surrounding Diane Lane made headlines. Some stayed quietly in the background, known only to those paying close attention. One of those moments came in 1995, during the filming of Judge Dredd. Diane played Judge Hershey, a strong and determined character opposite Sylvester Stallone. On screen, their dynamic was intense, filled with tension, strength, and sharp exchanges that made their scenes stand out. Naturally, that kind of chemistry sparked speculation. But off-screen, the story took a different turn. Instead of Stallone, it was the film's director, Danny Cannon, who formed a connection with Diane. During production, the two shared a brief romance, one that remained largely out of the spotlight. It wasn't a long-lasting relationship, but it ended on good terms, and they were occasionally seen together at public events afterward. It was a quiet chapter in her life, but one that reflected a recurring theme: the way her personal and professional worlds sometimes overlapped in unexpected ways. A similar story unfolded years earlier with Nicolas Cage. The two first met in 1984 while working on Rumble Fish. At the time, both were still building their careers. Cage working under the direction of his uncle, Francis Ford Coppola, and Diane continuing her rise as one of Hollywood's most promising young actresses. What began as a friendship gradually strengthened over the years. Then, in 2000, they found themselves working together again in The Family Man. This time, their connection evolved into something more. Their relationship, however, remained brief and relatively private. Despite the shift in their dynamic, both Diane and Cage maintained a high level of professionalism on set, ensuring their work was never affected. Diane later spoke openly about that period, emphasizing that their relationship never interfered with their long-standing friendship or their performances. Now, looking back decades later, Diane Lane reflects on her life with a sense of calm and perspective. With 2 marriages, a daughter, and a career that has spanned generations, her story has always extended beyond the screen. Rumors, speculation, and curiosity have followed her at every stage. But she has never let them define her.